Today, we're diving into a story that sounds almost impossible. It's about how, way before we had satellites or any kind of modern tech, our whole understanding of a continent was built from the memory of just one person.
I mean, really think about that for a second. Today, we've got GPS in our pockets. But picture the 19th century. From a European point of view, huge parts of the globe were just blank spaces on a map. So how on earth did you fill them in? How could you possibly chart thousands of miles of terrain you had never even seen? Well, let's find out. All right, so let's set the scene. We're in Eastern Africa in the late 1800s. For map makers back in Europe, this region was a giant puzzle. It was a place of immense scale, known only through these little bits and pieces of information, fragmented reports, some charts of the coastline, but the interior, a huge question mark. Now, the key to solving this puzzle wasn't some newfangled technology. It wasn't an expedition with hundreds of people. The answer came from a person. It came from meticulously, carefully recording the spoken testimony of a local expert who had walked the routes, who knew the rivers, and who understood the landscape in a way no outsider ever could. So, who was this person? Well, the central figure in this whole story wasn't a European explorer or a fancy royal cartographer. No, he was the source itself, a living, breathing, walking encyclopedia of geographical data. His name was Sadi Bin Ahedi. He was from a district near what we now call Zanzibar, and he was a seasoned caravan traveler. The map we're talking about wasn't on paper. It was all in his head, built from years and years of experience, of physically walking through the vast interior of the continent.
And what's so incredible is that Sadi's knowledge wasn't just about getting from point A to point B. It was so rich with vivid sensory detail. I mean, look at this quote. He's describing a mountain, Donyon Gai, and he says it shimmers and changes color, like gold, then silver, then black. This isn't just data, it's poetry, it's lived experience. And his expertise didn't stop at geography. The man was also a linguistic and cultural expert. He could give you entire vocabulary lists comparing local dialects. He knew the customs of different peoples, their settlements, even the kinds of weapons they used. He was an invaluable ethnographic source, way more than just a guide. And just to give you a sense of the sheer scale we're talking about, when someone asked him about Lake Nyanza, he said he once traveled for 60 days, 2 entire months, along its shore and never, ever saw the other side. Can you even imagine the mental map you'd need to hold all that information? Okay, so you have this incredible mind, this living library of information in Sadi Bin Ahedi. But how do you get it out? How do you take all of that memory and story and turn it into something structured, something you can put on paper? Well, for that, you need a different kind of expert. Enter the second key player in our story, Reverend T. Wakefield. He was a missionary stationed in Mombasa, and he became the crucial link. He was the one who sat down with Sadi, who listened for hours and hours, and who painstakingly wrote everything down, translating this epic oral history into a written document. And Wakefield's notes were just amazing. He didn't just write down, route takes 12 hours. No, he captured the meaning behind the place names, like Bungo Kundu, which means red clay. He even noted down local customs, like how people there mixed that very clay with oil. This was the raw data, the very first step in turning memory into a map. Which brings us to the final and maybe most challenging stage. We have the source, Sadi. We have the scribe, Wakefield. But what they created wasn't a map yet, not really. It was a rich text, a story. To turn that story into a scientific drawing, you needed a specialist to solve one great big puzzle. And that specialist was a cartographer named Keith Johnston. His job was to take Wakefield's text, a document built entirely on human memory with all its quirks, and translate it into the precise, mathematical, unforgiving language of mapmaking. And that's the million-dollar question, right? How do you turn something as fluid as human experience into a scientific map? At its core, Johnston's challenge was trying to merge two completely different realities. On one side, you have Sadi's knowledge, absolutely priceless, incredibly detailed, but measured in things like days of travel. And on the other side, you have what science demands: precision, consistency, hard numbers. Johnston realized that Sadi's memory, like any person's, had natural inconsistencies. For example, he noted a tendency to exaggerate distances landward.
So Johnston essentially became a detective. He pored over the data, and he started to find patterns. He figured out there was a consistent exaggeration of distance, about 1.24 to 1, and a consistent error in direction, about 15 degrees off. So he started making adjustments. He anchored Sadi's routes to fixed points that were known for sure, like Mount Kilimanjaro, and he cross-referenced everything with over a dozen other sources just to be absolutely certain.
You can really see his systematic method here. First, anchor the human story to cold, hard scientific facts. Second, check it against everything else you can find. Third, apply these consistent mathematical corrections to account for the human element. And then finally, once all that work is done, you can draw the map.
And that's how it happened. This incredible three-part process. The source, the scribe, and the analyst is what finally filled in those blank spaces. It's just a powerful, powerful story about how knowledge is actually made.
Because when you look at that final map, you're not seeing the work of one person or one culture. It was a true collaboration, a fusion. It absolutely required Sadi Bin Ahedi's deep, personal expertise of his own homeland. It needed Reverend Wakefield's patient, diligent work as a scribe. And it depended on Keith Johnston's rigorous scientific analysis. Take away any one of those three pieces, and the map simply could not have been made. And you know, this whole story is a perfect example of what knowledge creation actually looks like in the real world. It's almost always a process of translation, taking one form of understanding, like oral history and personal experience, and translating it into a structured format, like a map that other people can use and build upon. So, okay, it's a fascinating story from the 1800s, but why should we care about it today? Because it pulls back the curtain on something we take for granted. It reminds us that behind the clean, objective lines on any map, there are human stories. It honors the absolutely essential role of local and indigenous knowledge. And it shows us that our modern view of the world is built on collaborations just like this one, collaborations that are so often invisible. And that really just leaves us with this one final kind of haunting question. We know Sadi Bin Ahedi's name because Wakefield and Johnston wrote it down. But how many others are out there? How many human maps remain unnamed? Their incredible knowledge just silently woven into the charts and the facts that we all trust today?